As George told you, I'm Lindsey Brown with the Department of Natural Resources, specifically the Recreational Trails Program. People often know us for Georgia's state parks and historic sites, or our public fishing areas and wildlife management areas. But we also have a team to help you fund your outdoor recreation projects, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The Georgia DNR Grants Unit manages several natural resources-based grants. Other states and other organizations certainly have similar opportunities, but I'll be highlighting 3 grants administered by Georgia DNR. Remember that 2 of these grants are federal pass-through grants with equivalent programs in most other states. If I had to guess, our highest profile grant is Conserve Georgia. Some of you may remember the ballot initiative from 2018. We were very fortunate. More than 80% of Georgia voters approved the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Program, and now we're seeing the fruits of that. The legislative guidelines for this grant list a number of specific eligible types of projects. This includes trails of regional significance, the legislation says. The key with any Conserve Georgia application is a strong conservation focus within that grant. This grant is open to local governments, state agencies, and nonprofits with a core mission in conservation. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is getting a lot of attention right now, mostly because of the passage a couple of months ago of the Great American Outdoors Act. While we've not worked out all the changes that this will bring, it certainly is an exciting time for LWCF here in Georgia. LWCF grants in Georgia are primarily geared toward local governments and recreational authorities. LWCF allows all kinds of outdoor recreation facilities, including trails. Now, the grant does require that the land for the project be preserved in perpetuity. This is something worth considering before applying. Our public lands being preserved are an important element of outdoor recreation and of conservation. However, it is something that will limit future development of those properties. LWCF cycles are generally open in even years. So for example, in October, just now in October of 2020, we finished up a funding cycle, and we anticipate a funding cycle probably in 2022. Rec Trails is probably the most obvious connection for this summit. All elements of these projects must be directly related to trails. Some funding is available specifically for non-motorized trails each cycle. Some is allocated specifically for motorized trails each cycle. Does your trail plan involve a trail solely for pedestrians? Are you hoping to provide opportunities for mountain biking or horseback riding? Or maybe you want to include multiple non-motorized uses. On the flip side, do you want folks to have a place to ride ATVs, dirt bikes, or even full-size 4x4 vehicles? Rec Trails really could be the best fit for your plans. Rec Trails has funding cycles that are generally held in odd years, and we are looking at conducting a cycle in mid-2021. That makes this a great time to start planning your project application now. I'm not going to tell you anything that you haven't heard in terms of grant criteria, but our criteria do favor projects with a strong vision, strong partnerships, and strong planning. So those are things to think about before you apply. And really, those are opportunities for development for any application. We're focused on the outdoors, as our name suggests. That's probably not a big shock. Documents that influence us include the State Wildlife Action Plan, which is often called SWAP, and the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, or SCORP. Not only do they influence us as grant administrators, but we're hoping that they're shaping your projects in the outdoors as well. If you want to talk about any of these grants, you're always welcome to call me. My colleagues that are listed here, though, they can field your specific questions about each program. Thank you for the chance to talk about trail funding. It's not the same as being on a trail, but we get excited about this side of it too. Have a great day.
Well, thank you, Eric. Really appreciate hearing from you about your experience leveraging transportation dollars and other funding for trails, really built upon what Lindsey said. And now we're going to turn to Pegeen Hanrahan and Jay Byars, who are going to give a quick introduction to themselves and walk us through how local governments can use the ballot box and other measures to raise funds for trails. Without further ado, Pegeen, please take us away.
Thank you so much, George, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. So I work for the Trust for Public Land as a Southeast Conservation Finance Director, which means that I work in Florida, Georgia, North, and South Carolina. And I'm really excited today to have County Councilman Jay Byars with the Dorchester County Council in South Carolina to talk about a measure that we worked on together there in Somerville, and just the general background that we use to help local governments, cities, and counties walk through the process of developing funding for their communities. And there's a proud history of that in Dorchester. Next slide. So we're talking today about passing local ballot measures for trails, parks, and land in Georgia. And these are the same steps that we walk through pretty much anywhere we work. Next slide. So the Trust for Public Land has been working on measures at the ballot box since about 1996. And in that period of time, we've had 572 wins. Our typical across the nation rate of passage is at about 82%. And as you can see from the little graphic there, local funding at city and county government levels is actually nearly half of all of the funding for conservation across the United States. And so we consider it a really important part of our mission to work with city and county governments to try to protect land for all of the values that it brings to communities. This is just a map across the country of places that there have been ballot measures that have passed. The states that are marked in pale green are states that have passed statewide measures like the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Act, which I'm sure y'all are all very familiar with. And then the counties and cities are noted as well. And as I said, it's been an extraordinary record of success. I will say that most of the places where you see statewide measures that are colored in, you also see a lot of local measures, whether city or county, because oftentimes there are incentives and matching opportunities for local government when the state passes a measure. And we're certainly looking for local governments in Georgia. And in fact, the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Act does provide some incentives for cities and counties to seek funding for their own communities. Next slide. This is just an example of the work. I'm sure many of you in the audience participated as supporters of the Georgia Outdoor Stewardship Act. And the Trust for Public Land actually worked with advocates there on the ground in Georgia to do the public opinion polling and then to help with designing the ballot measure. In terms of the ballot language is really the most important factor when you have a favorable environment to whether or not a measure is likely to pass. And then designing the mail. We really work hard to stay on message and to make sure that we reach those voters who could either, vote for or against. Those voters in the middle are the ones that we're most trying to reach. Next. Essentially 3 different types of funding measures that local governments can use, and it varies a little bit from state to state because it's usually authorized under state law. But the first and foremost, really in terms of many things, is general obligation bonds. For a city or county government, a general obligation bond is somewhat analogous to what you at home might do to develop a mortgage for your home. You can't write a check for your whole home at once usually, if you're like most of us, and so instead you take out a loan and pay that back over the arc of 15 or 20 or 30 years. And a general obligation bond is exactly like that for local government. It's a long-term lending instrument, but for the most part, it depends somewhat on state law and on local capacity, but usually the larger bonds require voter authorization. Local governments can also just issue property taxes, and that's usually just a vote of the county council or the county commission, but oftentimes land and parks and similar priorities tend to be considered a secondary need after public safety, police, fire, things like that, roads, public works. And so oftentimes local government officials really prefer to put that choice in the hands of the voters, even if they have the authority to do it on their own. But it oftentimes is essentially a straw ballot. I have one like that on the ballot this year that I'm helping in Collier County, Florida. That's really a straw ballot authorized in the county commission to go ahead and raise property taxes. And then sales taxes. Sales taxes are, they all of these measures have pros and cons. The challenge with sales taxes, they tend to bring in a lot of money, at least in good times. Our sales taxes are probably not doing quite so well at this very moment. But they usually are competing with other substantial capital project needs in local governments, whether it's roads or public safety or something along those lines. They also are regressive, and so there can be some equity concerns that local governments have, but they tend to come in bigger and faster than some of these other mechanisms. Next slide. So I've covered a little bit of this already, but as I mentioned, you can do a pay-as-you-go type program, which is what a property tax typically is, or sales tax, or you can do a bonding long-term measure. You can do impact fees or general fund obligations, and it's not unusual for larger local governments to really do a little bit of all of these, to do sort of a multi-legged stool to fund whatever the large-term capital project might be. Next slide. So one of the questions I'm getting a lot nowadays in the time of coronavirus, unfortunately, and the negative economic impacts that we've all experienced as a result is, well, can we do this in a difficult time? And this slide was actually put together by someone I work with down in Doral in Miami-Dade County, Ryan Cambridge. But this really shows that in good times and in bad, we see passage of these measures, whether it was post 9/11 or I actually had a measure on the ballot in a place that was hit by Hurricane Katrina, not Louisiana, but Florida. Whether or not it's in the recession times or the great times, we tend to see pretty even passage of these measures, which is it really speaks to the long-term value that people see in protecting parks and open space. Next slide. Councilman Byars will appreciate this. We really don't see this as a Democrat or Republican issue. We see it as an issue of what people's fundamental values are. This really maps our nation's response to the presidential election in 2016. You see the red states and the blue states, but what we're most focused on in this slide is the green dots. Those are the places where we passed ballot measures in 2016, and you can see a very large number of them are in red states, including my own red state of Florida. I am actually a little more experienced in working in conservative places because of the states that I work in, and it's really a value that transcends politics, which I think we all need at this moment in our nation's history. Next slide. And in Georgia, I'm not going to try to belabor this slide, but this data is publicly available on our website at landvote.org. We've had a proud history in Georgia of 42 measures with 33 of those passing. So that's right on line in terms of the track record that I talked about. And as I mentioned, we have support at the Trust for Public Land to do more measures in Georgia. And so if you're listening to this saying, hey, I'd like to walk through these steps, well, please give me a call, because that's my job, is to help local governments in Georgia pass ballot measures. Next slide. And that's just showing that that history. That 78.5% win rate and an average yes percent approaching 70%, 68.5% in Georgia. And as you know, GOSA was even higher than that. So that really just shows the extent to which we're able to get a broad consensus in terms of passing funding for parks and land and trails and open space. Next slide. So I'm going to just walk you briefly through ballot measure basics, and then Councilman Byars is going to take you through some of the actual on-the-ground success in his own community. Next slide. So these are the steps that we really encourage any local government to follow, regardless of whether or not the Trust for Public Land is helping. This is something we do day in and day out, and so we hope you will call us, but even if you don't, we recommend you follow these same steps. We always start with feasibility research that really looks at all of the different options that might be pursued by the local government. Then we move to a public opinion survey, and we all have opinions about public opinion surveys, but our own experience is that it's really important to gauge the feelings and values of the local government, of citizens, of voters in the community. And so we really encourage public opinion surveying, and then we recommend the mechanisms within the local government to ensure accountability, transparency, and purchasing properties that hit on the key values of citizens. And then, as I mentioned, the ballot language is the most important thing that people have to pay attention to. It's the only thing we know every voter is going to read. And then usually privately funded, we do a campaign, and the campaign elements are not different from the campaign elements of anything you're familiar with at the ballot box. It includes mail, it includes paid social media, usually it includes newspaper endorsements and endorsements from key individuals and organizations and so on. And we usually fund that completely privately. Next slide. And I'm not going to belabor this because we need to move along, but we always sort of try to follow these same steps. I mean, this is an example of what we did in Dorchester County, but we do probably 40 or 50 of these over the course of a 2-year election cycle, and we really try to look for those mechanisms that will work within the fiscal capacity and the interests and the values and the legal structure within each community. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Councilman Jay Byars. He is a terrific partner to work with, lots of fun, and in addition to being very brilliant and very committed to these issues. So Councilman Byars, you can take it away.
Thank you, Pegeen. I appreciate that. So we'll go through a couple of things, and I'll go back to what Pegeen talked about early on in that map, and all of us went to 3rd grade art class, and very few of us were taught that red plus blue equals green. But the reality is, this is really not a left issue or a right issue. Conservation and public lands is an issue about America and conserving what we have. And God's not making any more real estate, and people realize that. So at least here in Charleston, where I'm from, I'm on Dorchester County Council, which is just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So most of the metropolitan areas in South Carolina and Georgia are experiencing the same growth pressures. And there's not a lot of opportunity to be able to conserve what's special. And we've got opportunities now to do that, especially with new funding federally with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We passed something locally because we saw an opportunity to do some things. As was alluded to earlier, I'm in elected office. I'm on county council, but I am a Republican in elected office, and we have a majority Republican council, and everybody voted for this. They all supported it. And one of the reasons they supported it is they saw the vision. Trust for Public Land, Pegeen and her team, first class, they really helped us to get the table set so that we understood what we were trying to do. And without their help, it would have been a lot more difficult, because I know some people are going to look for something politically to lean on. And Trust for Public Land certainly helped us with that. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll go from some talking points there. So what you kind of see here is just an overview of what we did. This is one of the parks in Dorchester County up in St. George. And we did a couple of things. This is my 3rd term on county council, and us winning this election last year in 2019 was really big. We actually passed this in 2016, which we'll go into. We got sued by a group of citizens who did not want to pay extra taxes. It's a very small minority group led by a local attorney. They didn't want to pay extra taxes. These are people that they're not fans of mine, but at the end of the day, the citizens wanted to see this. So we passed this back in 2016, I think with 62% of the vote, and we got sued. We won in the circuit court. We ended up losing the state Supreme Court. So we had to go back and do it again. So we did it again, and we did it in 2019. And this is where Pegeen got a little nervous, because we did this in an off-year election. So in November of 2019, there really wasn't anything else on the ballot. So we had to turn out the vote. And the polls kind of told us that, yeah, we had a majority of people that were going to vote for this, but it might be tight. And I know my constituents. And if you've got some people that are really involved with your constituency locally, and you feel like you know your people, and if they trust you, and if you've done your homework, you can get out there and run a campaign and do this. And that's what we were able to do. I think we passed it with close to 70% of the vote in an off-year election. And I'm convinced that if we would have done it this year, current drama aside, we would have probably gotten 80% of the vote. I think a lot of people truly believe in this, and they want to be able to get out and go to public places. So we're doing some really cool things. This is one thing we're doing up in the county seat. We're building an athletic park for the community up there. They just don't have very much. And the days of just bush hogging a grass field and calling it a park and for athletic fields for kids, in rural communities, we just saw that it was time to do something better. So we're doing some things up there that we really feel like is going to do some good things. Let's do the next slide. So this particular park, and this is an Ashley River Park, and this is really the cornerstone from where we're going to build the rest of the house for Dorchester County Parks. When I first got on county council in 2010, I went to, I think, the National Parks and Recreation Conference, and I think it was in Atlanta in 2011, and went to a lot of seminars. I was the only guy on council. I was sort of pushing this, and learned a lot from those seminars, and came back and talked to Charleston County Parks Director. And we really just tried to, instead of reinventing the wheel, we worked to do something else. This park is on the Ashley River. This is where the Swamp Fox, Francis Marion, spent a lot of his time right here on the Ashley River, holding the British and Lord Cornwallis from moving north to engage Washington's army. All that happened around here. There's a lot of history here. This was going to be a neighborhood with 180 houses back in 2007. The economy crashed. The county was able to buy it. The developer had $7 million in it. We were able to buy it with some seed money that was passed in 2010. Once again, thanks to the Trust for Public Land for getting that bond passed. And we bought this property for $1.6 million. It's 83 acres on the Ashley River with 3/4 of a mile of river frontage. Now we're going to be building a $13 million park out there that's really within 10 miles of 110,000 people in our county. This is a home run. Everybody loves this thing, and it's under construction and it's moving. So you just got to have some vision. If you go out there and you let people know what you're trying to do and they trust you with a number and a vision, they can really believe in you and they believe in what you're doing. And that's part of what we did. So let's do the next slide, please. At this bullet point, in 2010, there was a $5 million bond that was passed with 71% for parks and open space and conservation. And so, candidly speaking, that was my year of election. I learned a lot knocking on 2,000 doors of my constituents. In principle, I had some problems with the way this was worded at that time. I had some concerns. I was glad it passed because it gave us the seed money we needed, and we put it to work, and we've done some darn good things with it. And then the next bullet point talks about, we passed in 2016 a referendum for $43 million. 30 million of that was going to go for libraries and only 13 for parks. Well, we lost in the Supreme Court, as we said. So one of the things I convinced council is, let's make some lemonade out of lemons here. We put $38 million in for parks and conservation on the next referendum in 2019, and we won. And that may be the next slide. Let's look at the next slide. It didn't get to that. So we ended up getting more monies. So that's enabling us to do a lot more, because what we're going to do is we're going to build a 300-acre passive park in town. We saved some property there, the 83 acres on the Ashley River, and we're in negotiations right now to buy up to another 600 acres along the Ashley River. So conceivably, we could have a 2-mile linear park along the Ashley River because we got this passed. Now, as an elected official, I can campaign for this. And this is where the Trust for Public Land gave us some great polling. We were able to rely on some data that they brought to us. I knew in my head, I've talked to enough HOA meetings over the years, my district was going to support this. I knew that was going to happen, but I didn't have the science behind it. This gave us the science that all the other councilmen and women just were like, okay, you know what, this is something people want to see, and they're okay putting it on the ballot, because this was a ballot measure. This was not something that we voted on as council to pass because we had to go to the referendum. The reason we had to go to the referendum is we were going over our 8% general obligation bonding cap. And so this took us over that cap, so the citizens had to vote for that. Well, the polling really helped us to be able to put the right message together. So we ran a campaign. And for those of you who are out there, if you work on staff, county staff, city staff, municipal staff, if you're the parks director or the city manager, associate manager, obviously, hopefully you know this, you cannot be part of any campaign. It's really important that you are not part of pushing a yes or a no. Let your elected officials do that. Let your citizens do that, which is what I was able to do. And so you can see the polling here where we had some polling, I think, with conservation, without conservation in the language. People love the conservation word in the language. I believe, Pegeen, tell me if I'm wrong, I believe we actually removed conservation from the language just because we didn't want to take a chance at losing in court. But buying property with the funds is in and of itself conservation. So we do plan on using it to do conservation. We're just going about it in a different way. This was just something where locally we had a concern just with a small group of citizens that might try to use that in court, and we didn't want to take a chance. So it was a little risky, but it still worked out, and we're moving ahead, which is awesome. Next slide, please. Here's the ballot question, and so you can kind of see the language in and of itself. We try to be really transparent. I think it's important when you do this, and Pegeen mentioned this earlier, it's important that people trust what you're doing, especially in this day and age when nobody trusts anything on social media or anything on the national news. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, nobody trusts what's out there. You trust your neighbor, you trust the guy that sits in front of you, or the woman that sits in front of you says, you can trust me to do this. This is important that you do this right. And so we spelled out exactly the dollar amount. We tried to spell out 3 projects where we'd already talked about for years what we were going to do, some trail work we were going to do, and just some land acquisition. And this is important that people knew, okay, there's a little flexibility here, but we're going to make you hold us accountable to the fact that there's some parks that we're committed to, and we're going to do those things. And people are excited to see that. And this question passed right at 70%. It was exciting to see. And really, I feel like general election, it would have passed even higher. Next slide. Okay, so, in this particular slide, we're looking at just, you got to tell people what it's going to cost, right? And so here's our thing in Dorchester County. We don't have county parks. Charleston County, which is right next door to us, 10 miles away, has world-class county parks. But driving to Charleston is a royal pain in the rear now. So I know a lot of you in Georgia can realize that. I mean, if you're driving from Gwinnett to another side of Atlanta, that's not fun. You want to do something in your backyard. So when I go to HOA meetings, I talk about, okay, this is going to cost you $40 a year, but you're not going to have to drive to James Island County Park, which is 45 minutes in your car one way if you don't have traffic, and you're going to be able to do the same things 5 minutes from your house. What is your time worth to you? And then you break it out into, hey, that's a Chick-fil-A sandwich every month. Well, I put that on one of my pages in one of my neighborhoods, and most people loved it. And this one guy flat out he was all over me about the Chick-fil-A sandwich comment. I'm like, all right, well, man, maybe it's a McDonald's cheeseburger for you. Whatever it is, at the end of the day, try to put it in terms that people really can understand, and that they understand it's an investment. It's not an expense. You're investing in your community. You're building your community. And that's where you really bridge the party lines, I think, that people understand. Next slide. All right, well, that's me with a really long beard because I was going to not shave until we won this thing. So there in and of itself, it's important to build a coalition. So one of the things I did personally, and I had some friends on council and other friends do this, you got to raise some money. And so, again, if you are staff, this is not your job. If you are a local community citizen, leader, or elected official, this is your job. Make some phone calls, call local businesses, call local developers, people that want to see this happen, people who will benefit from building parks. Well, who's going to benefit from building parks? Home builders. Hey, guess what? There's a new 83-acre park near your house, and they're going to contribute to that campaign because it helps them move product. It helps them sell houses. So there's all kind of people. The business community got behind it. The Chamber of Commerce got behind it. The local NAACP got behind it. You get the right people on board because everybody realizes this is a win for our community, our kids, our families, where we can invest in healthy body, healthy mind. They're able to do things where they feel like they can be safe in their backyard and do some really good stuff. So, you get some endorsements in the paper, do some things. Go ahead to the next slide. That's fine. This is just one of the flyers that was created. So I've got a couple of friends that do politics. Obviously, being in politics, I was able to reach out to people that ran my campaign. We got another guy in town that runs some national campaigns that does some work for Senator Rubio and some other people nationally. And so he helped with this as well. And it's funny because they're all Republicans, right? And so Republicans are supposed to be, no tax increase. Everybody gets on board with this because they understand this isn't just growing government. This isn't raising, this is building a community. And there's a big darn difference when you're doing these types of things. And I think if you articulate that message, people really buy into it. And it's a win. Right now, it's truly a win. Teddy Roosevelt did a great thing when he set up the national parks and did all the public land out west. And I don't know anyone that doesn't enjoy going through one of our national parks. I don't know anybody that ever complains about, oh, this is a waste of money. If that's not even something I can relate to. I'm sorry. So it's important. Find your local resources. There are people out there that run campaigns. If you don't have people that run campaigns, call us. I know people that run campaigns. Pegeen can help you with that. I mean, it's important to be able to do and get the right message out and be very clear with it. Tell them how much it's going to cost. Tell them what you're going to do, and make a commitment to that, and then people will buy in. Next slide. Okay, so here's just the breakdown of how things voted. And it was funny that night. My text thread was just blowing up. And I always go check. You can check your local polling places and see how things are going. And I went and checked on some key places that I knew would be battlegrounds, and it was just blowout victories. I'm like, we're done. I didn't even have to wait on some of the other stuff. I knew where the battles would be. And you see the percentage. And I'm telling you, when we went to a higher dollar amount and we went to an off-year election, I think Pegeen probably was just going to need to start taking some medication. And some of the council people were just sort of raising their eyebrows. I'm like, trust me, guys, this is a win, and it is. So just be smart about it. Now, we didn't go ask for 150 million. We got to live within our budget, live within your means. Don't be ridiculous, but don't be afraid to look at exactly what you want to do, and then get somebody on base, and then get another person on base. And I think people saw that we were responsible with what they gave us in 2010, that $5 million. And if you're responsible with the first bit, they'll give you a chance to go with the second bite at the apple. Next slide. And so just in conclusion, first I want to just thank the Trust for Public Land. I want to thank Pegeen seriously because they really helped us make this happen. And if you trust the people you're working with, you trust the county people that you're working with, or the city people you're working with, talk to your citizens, take the right steps and set up a campaign, and you're honest and you're very transparent. People are going to trust you with this. This is a winning issue because at this point, people want to be able to build communities. So we were excited to do this. We're thankful for Dorchester County to be able to get this done, and we're thankful for the Trust for Public Land, and I'll hand it back over to Pegeen.
Very good. Well, thank you for this opportunity, and we would love to have examples like this all over Georgia, and we're open to any questions that y'all may have. I know Councilman Byars has a lot to recommend in terms of on-the-ground activities that you can get involved in to make this happen in your own county. So if there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them now.
Thank you, Pegeen. Thank you, Jay. Thank you also to Eric and